Sharing there. Okay. I show we currently have 52 signed on, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jamie Warrington. I'm with the Department of Education and School Transportation here in Tallahassee. We want to thank you for attending this morning. I just want to go over a couple of little housekeeping tips for those of you that may never have participated in a webinar before. Charlie, if you'll advance.
Oh.
There you go. Okay. I'm going to show you a slide in a second here that's going to show you the control panel that should have popped up when you logged on. We kind of have time definitive presentation, so as time allows, we'll be able to go ahead and try to address your questions that you might have. Everybody starts off as muted, so we won't be able to hear anything that you say. But if you do have a question about something that you hear during the presentation, please feel free to click the raise hand button on your control panel. And if we can, we'll go ahead and identify you and unmute you so that you can ask your question. We do ask that you keep your questions short and please stay on topic so that we can make sure we conclude the webinar on time.
And Jamie, I would add that the session's being recorded in case anybody wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, we are also recording this, and it will be available within the next day or two on the FAPT website for use at a later date. If you don't get a chance to have your raised hand answered, you can also use the chat box at the bottom of your control panel and send the question, and I'll try to keep them organized and get the appropriate person to answer during the presentation, again, if time allows. If not, we can follow up with an email after the presentation is over. And we do ask that just in anticipation of you needing to ask a question, if you quiet anything that's in the background, your cell phones, if you have an office, close your door. Background noise on a webinar can be quite distracting and make it difficult to understand what you're trying to say. Okay, and then this last slide here is a copy of what your control panel should look like. And you can see you can type your question and then identify, just go ahead and send it and I'll get it on my end. There's your raise hand button Charlie's pointing to now. And then, of course, the button above that is your minimize screen to shrink it down or to make it full screen. With that, Charlie, it is all yours.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. I'm Charlie Hood, the Director of Student Transportation with the Florida Department of Education. One thing I want to emphasize right from the get-go is that we have, I hope, a very diverse group within our audience, meaning that some of you are from MIS, some of you are from finance offices, many of you are from transportation, and some of you may not know why you're here. But at any rate, we're glad you're with us, and we have those same functional groups represented. Some of you might be from charter schools. We hope we've got a few charter schools people on the call too. We here are trying to mimic that diversity within the presenters and within the presentation. So you'll see that each of us are going to sort of do a panel handoff of the various slides within the presentation as we go through it. I'll probably be covering the majority of the content, but we'll also have Lee Davis will be presenting on the formula, and Candy Garcia will be presenting on the IT aspects, on which I am admittedly the least expert in among all of us, I think. So hopefully I'll learn a few things too. I think we all will. I'm going to let Lee cover the FTE versus FEFP part of it, if you don't mind, Lee. But when we get into your slides, but there are some terminology things we need to talk about, and we'll hit those as we go along. But the main thing I wanted to emphasize is before we start is that it's the transportation reporting although a lot of people think of it, quote unquote, as a transportation function, it's really it really involves a lot of teamwork. If you don't yet know all the team players within your school district, please make a point to do that. Make sure you know who your MIS people are that deal with this. Make sure that charter schools know how this process works. Every time we send out the survey instructions, each survey, we get a few calls from charter schools that say, I didn't know I could claim transportation, or I don't know who to talk to within my local school district. So as the sponsor of those schools, we would just ask that you reach out to them if you're a school district person and make sure they know who you are, how the process works, and help them to the best of your ability. We appreciate that if they're operating school buses or other and transporting eligible students or other modes that are eligible. All right, quick overview. Greg Aiken, the president of Florida Association for Pupil Transportation and chair of this ad hoc transportation funding group that's really sort of the genesis of all of this, is going to speak to you for a little bit. Then we're going to, Lee's going to talk a little bit about just the real basics of the FEFP transportation formula, because we're not really here today to make you an expert in that, but we think it's important. If you are somewhat new to transportation or don't know about the formula, that you understand that the formula is kind of the end result of all of this, and it's very important that the reporting be accurate and timely in order to produce the formula on time so that DOE can in turn distribute the FEFP dollars. We're going to talk a little bit about the FAPT best practices document that's been developed by the committee, by the work group, and in fact that is 90% of the content within the presentation itself came from that document that the group worked so hard on. And that process that's described will be described. Basically, we've divided it into 4 areas. It seemed logical to us chronologically. All the pre-survey activities and training and so on, that has meetings and communication that has to take place, what has to take place actually during survey week, and then the post-survey. And although your drivers may not agree with this, the parts that take place during the survey week are actually the narrowest and the easiest part. It's the parts before and after that really are very time-consuming administratively. The audit documentation, out of all this, what is the auditor, when they come in every 3 years from the Auditor General's office, what are they going to need to see so that you can avoid having to have audit adjustments and getting funding taken away in the future, those kinds of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about the new membership categories, because that's one product of the committee that's been developed that's important. So with that, I'm going to flip the slide, and I'm going to let Greg Aiken start telling you about the FAPT Ad Hoc Transportation Funding Group. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie, and welcome everybody. In April 2012, the Florida Executive Committee decided to put this ad hoc group together to look at the student transportation funding process, procedures, and issues. Our initial objectives were to look at the 2003 report from the legislator funding transportation to Florida schools of choice. Considering the recommendation, we wanted to look at the charter schools to see if we could calculate them under our formula separately from the district's calculation.
Greg, I'm getting a little bit of echo and having a little hard time understanding you. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it.
Let me see.
Maybe talk a little more directly into the handset if you're not doing that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Right into the mic. I mean my headphones. Hopefully, sorry about that. But anyways, the funding report, we started looking at it and it was huge. And it was a lot of data we would have to collect. So we, as a group, we narrowed that down and modified for short terms, which we have 2 of those goals that we did meet. First one, next slide, is we developed the best practice guidelines, which we're going to go over today, for districts to consider in establishing and documenting their own collection process. We want to make sure we met 3 data collection points: timely, accurate, and be able to meet the audit standards. And like Charlie mentioned a few minutes ago, we wanted to reduce the complexity of the current data collection process and still meet the requirements of the formula. And like Charlie said, the best practices emphasize a team approach in which all parties, and he mentioned that transportation, finance, and technology services, work together to produce this document and get it up to the state for approval. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Greg. And I think that you will all see that this committee they've met many times, approximately at least once a month. The committee has met at least once a month since April of last year, and has met via these webinars, via these web meetings. So it's been very efficient and low cost. There was no travel involved, and has been very successful, in my view, at achieving these two, what turned out to be its first two goals, you might say. There are longer-term goals that we probably won't go into today that I know the committee has to do things like look at other aspects of the formula and maybe go ahead and see if we can update that choice funding report that was presented to the legislature in 2003. And at some point, I think the committee is going to want to tackle the issue of documenting funding adequacy. Is transportation funding adequate, and does FAPT want to recommend anything different to the legislature? I think some of us know the answer to that, but we won't go there. The formula, Lee, are you ready to jump in and talk about the formula a little bit?
I am ready. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Lee Davis. I'm in the Office of Funding and Financial Reporting, and I'm just going to talk about the transportation formula for a little bit. The transportation calculation is one of the components within the Florida Education Finance Program, or the FEFP. The calculation is rider-driven, and there is only a set amount of funds allocated for this component every year. And briefly, as Charlie mentioned earlier, I want to explain the difference between FEFP, FTE, and riders. The FEFP is kind of the overall K through 12 funding formula. It refers to all the components that make up classroom funding, including transportation. FTE is referring to those classroom students that are used to generate that formula. So FTE does not mean funding. FTE is referring to those classroom students. And then riders is what drives the transportation formula. So a lot of times people will use this terminology mixed together, but really they're each specific things. And FTE doesn't mean riders. Riders are the kids on the school bus. FTE are the kids in the classroom. So just wanted to kind of clear that up, make sure everyone understands that. You can see in the second bullet, these are the statutes that govern the formula. And then also a key part of the formula is that if a student's IEP requires special transportation services, they are eligible for additional funding, and they are considered a weighted student within the formula. Now going on to the actual head count and student count that we use to do the formula, the first thing that happens to the students is that they're adjusted for the term length of service. Just to give you an idea, 180 days of service is equal to one student. So if a kid's only there for half the year, he only generates half a student worth of rider. Other adjustments are shown in bullet 4, and you can see there's a cost of living adjustment. That's based on the Florida Price Level Index, and that actually shows the difference in the cost of hiring personnel in different counties. So each student count for each county is adjusted a little bit for these items. You can see there's a rurality adjustment. So if you're in a more rural area, the idea there is that there are more expenses. You can see that there's the average bus occupancy index. What that refers to is how many students on average you have in each of your buses. The idea there is to reward efficiency and to encourage people to utilize their buses as much as possible. And I can go on to the next slide. Okay, so there's kind of two main components that are funded, and you see them here. Actually, the ESE allocation is calculated first, and this is based on the previously mentioned adjustments and a per-student amount. These funds are actually not prorated. They are calculated just as they are for each district. And then what happens is the remaining funds, after paying these funds, go to the base student allocation. And these are all your other kids that do not require special transportation services but still meet the eligibility for funding. So these are not ESE, or actually these include both your ESE kids and your kids that do not require special services. So these are all your kids in the base component. And the remaining funds are prorated based on each district's number of these students. And that's kind of the nutshell of transportation funding. It's based on the number of riders you have and certain conditions that are specific to your district, and also the number of kids that require special ESE services.
Okay, thank you, Lee. All right, now we're going to get into what was really the primary, I guess, core purpose of doing the webinar today, which is for those either, for people of varying experience, whether you're new to it or whether you're very experienced. We hope we'll all learn something today about the nuts and bolts of survey preparation, of the survey and reporting process, the pre-survey, the survey, and the reporting process. Now, keeping in mind that this is necessarily somewhat generic in that each school district has its own way of getting to the point where it reports its information to DOE. Now, many of you use standard software packages and so on that are available from consortia like NEFEC or PACE or whatever to get to that point. But the procedures always vary, and some school districts have the range of ways that it's done in the state vary from we've seen where the drivers just write everything out longhand on a 11 by 14 pad or whatever, to very automated and processes. So they vary depending on the size and the needs of the particular district. So keep that in mind, that this is all generic. This isn't meant to say that it's got to be like this in your district. These are truly best practices. These are very little of this is regulatory. Essentially, until we get to the reporting to DOE part, very little of it's regulatory. But what we want to emphasize during the pre-survey preparation is that you train your staff and that you implement these things in plenty of time before the survey, so that so that everybody knows what's going on when it gets time to survey week and after that. If possible, you need to have an initial roster of students by bus. You need to make sure everyone's familiar with the timelines, what has to happen when, including both the state prescribed timelines and all the internal ones that go into this process. All riders, if possible, need to be registered and assigned to routes. All potential riders, we know you don't know who all the actual riders are going to be in advance. All students need to be properly coded. The hazardous walking database it has to be updated, and as you know, that's a separate web application that describes the areas in which kids are eligible, in which elementary school students who live less than 2 miles from school are eligible by virtue of the locations in which they would have to walk if they didn't have a school bus ride, meeting the statutorily described hazardous walking criteria. That's a process all by itself, and maybe we need to do a webinar on that at some point, Jamie.
Yes,
you need to communicate obviously with your IT office about the process and be sure everybody's on the same page. And first and foremost, most importantly, train your school bus operators on the process, including charter school bus including operators who serve charter schools. And those may be publicly employed, they may be privately employed, as is the case in Duval and Santa Rosa, and some in Miami-Dade and maybe elsewhere. Or they may be with charter schools. So just keep in mind, don't leave any of your bus operators out of the process if at all possible. Again, in the training and implementation phase, you need to be sure that your vehicle identification numbers are correct in your database, in your school bus inventory, and your charter schools need to be included, as we already talked about. Need to be have some way of being aware of who your courtesy riders are, and we use the term courtesy loosely. I don't actually like that term. I prefer to call it ineligible riders, although there are some ineligible riders that aren't the under 2 mile kids. This is primarily the under 2 mile kids who don't have disabilities and aren't qualified for state funding. So ineligible is probably a better term. I like to avoid the term courtesy because sometimes parents regard the transportation of those children as a right and not a courtesy. Coordinate with public transit in schools if applicable, meaning that if you are in one of those southeastern, primarily southeastern Florida, but maybe also Orange, Pinellas, and others that uses public transit to transport kids to school, you need to be sure you've got the procedures worked out for how you're going to document that those kids rode during survey week, including the 11-day, the 6 days prior, the 11-day window. And again, we need to be sure that your maps are accurately identify attendance zones and hazardous walking areas. And the student registration piece of the pre-survey activities includes your ridership list by route, your student listing, providing blank or write-in sheets for students who are not on the ridership list, because drivers, as you know, will inevitably have some kids show up that just moved in, somehow weren't in the computer. Some districts may not even have computers for that purpose. So, and if you've got kids that are on public transit, make sure you know, to the extent possible in advance, who those kids are, or provide a means of capturing them during survey week. As far as assigning membership codes and those issues, again, these are sort of the best practices in advance kinds of things. If you've got an automated process that can define all those categories, and I've listed the 5 categories here, you'll notice those don't match exactly the current membership categories, but I think you'll see later in the presentation that they do match the new consolidated categories. You can use a manual process to deter, or automated to determine distance from school and basic eligibility. But those things will be audited later, so it's important to do as much advanced work as you can with that. And obviously, we talked about hazardous walking students in assigning membership codes. Here's some of the things that the committee told us as we went through this, were some common steps that school districts use. Obviously, operators are given district-generated forms, if at all possible, with the assigned students in advance, so that they know so that they have a process for documenting when they get on the bus. An operator's primary duty, as you know, is to safety and paying attention to the road and the kids around the bus and so on. And so we want the process that they go through to be as unobtrusive as possible and as non-distracting as possible during the survey count period. Instruction, so the more user-friendly and easy you can make the forms and pre-populated and those kinds of things, the better. They need to be instructed in the process, obviously, and so that they know what to expect. And the blank forms need to be provided for those kids who aren't on the district-generated lists. Other best practices, some of this is repetitive, giving them assigned students in advance, providing instruction, providing blank forms, making the forms as simple as possible so that they use a simple indicator such as a check mark or a fill-in bubble sheet or a barcode kind of approach. If you're really if we're really sophisticated, and I'm gonna stick my neck out and say 10 years from now this is where we all want to be, although some parents may not agree, some civil libertarians may not agree. I think to the extent that we can capture kids in an automated way is even better. Barcodes, biometrics, whatever we can do in the future, I think will make the driver's jobs a lot easier. And we've talked with some of the routing software companies about those things. They're all interested in it too because they see it as a potential market. Count sheets are obviously have to be inspected by the department staff before they're keyed in and put into the digital or manual counting processes. The operator report itself. These are kind of the minimum things that should be on it for auditability. You know, we know some of you have more information on them. We would emphasize, I guess, you know, some of the group may disagree with me, and I hope the other presenters will speak up if you disagree, but we would emphasize, again, keeping the driver's sheet to where it doesn't include any more extraneous information than necessary to make the driver's job as easy as possible. But there is a certain amount of this that's listed there that is pretty much necessary, and we will provide as follow-up to this webinar. The committee has collected several kind of best practice forms from each of the districts, not all the districts, but ones represented on the committee. So those sample forms will be available on the FAPT website, where the rest of this stuff will be. So if you don't already have a driver form, or you want to look at yours and that you're happy with, or want to look at how others do it, those will be out there for you to take a look at. Student data collection. The operator's primary responsibility is to document at least the first day during this 11-day window that is at each student road. Now, some of the districts we talked about in the committee document each kid every time they get on the bus during the survey period. That's up to you. The only potential advantage to that is that if a kid's attendance record doesn't happen to match up for the single day that you record a kid, you stand a better chance of capturing a handful more kids if you have the drivers record every day, because all that has to happen for them to be, you know, assuming they're funding eligible, for them to be legitimate riders, is they have to have ridden at least once during the survey week or the 6 days prior, and be in attendance in school. Now, that said, I'm not going to get into some of the creative incentives that we have occasionally seen over the years for districts to encourage non-riders to ride, but we don't in any way, shape, or form encourage you to have non-riders who don't normally ride during the term ride just for the purpose of student counts. And I can get into that in more detail with you individually if you want. We've actually got an older CFO memo on that point. It will come back to bite you if you do that. We don't want you to Christmas tree. We don't want operators to Christmas tree all riders, of course. And the operators just have to understand that their signature on that report is a legal document, and it will be used in an audit. The operator report, the driver worksheet, whatever you want to call it, is the source document that drives all of this, no pun intended, and is absolutely the most critical thing that the auditors will look at. This, of course, has already been talked about, but this is essentially this basic procedure that all your drivers will need to be familiar with, and that they've, and I'm sure are by now. Post-survey review and reporting. Needless to say, this is a lot of the hard work. I feel the frustration in this clip art because that you must feel during that period of time, because it's such a compressed period of time during which you have to assemble all this stuff. But it is important that the information be keyed in accurately and timely and reported. So I wanted to emphasize on this post-survey period that, and Sheila McLeod pointed this out to me, as did Candy Garcia, that we need to be careful that you understand that Sheila's, by the way, on the ad hoc group from Duval. And thank you for that, Sheila. She pointed out that it's important that we emphasize during these next couple of slides that these are kind of mostly best practices, what happens at the local level. We haven't yet gotten chronologically in the slides or the process to the actual reporting to DOE. So some of these may be optional, they may not be something that you have to do, but these are the best practices that the committee established amongst themselves. Obviously, the ridership data, once it leaves transportation, is transmitted to your local IT department differently depending on how your district operates. Membership categories are sometimes verified at one level or the other. Districts with routing software, have to work to update ridership tables, and you have different processes for your error checking and corrections. you've got issues with withdrawals and enrollments and attendance, student schedules, duplicate records, and those kinds of things, all of which have to be, systematized and hopefully you've got some error reports that make as much of that automatic, that flag as many of those things as possible automatically. The correcting errors is obviously, before you submit to DOE, is obviously critical, if at all possible. The manual or electronic matches need to be made against various records such as the demographic records, the ESE, your schedules and attendance, your hazardous walking codes, versus the locations, and any inconsistencies worked out, noted and worked out, and corrected. If there are errors in coding relating to attendance or eligibility, those need to be corrected and new reports run. And the reports that will be produced as the database records are checked against the ridership records, hopefully. So again, these methods all differ, and this is that's a lot to say, or very little to say about a very lengthy process. Ridership data files, and this is kind of in preparation for state reporting. Need to ensure that the ridership data files submitted from the district transportation office to the district IT office have one record per student, unique by Florida ID number, the student identifier, number identifier, matching demographic record, and Candy asked that we emphasize that for students transported to another district to receive instruction, that you submit a student transportation format only. In other words, the other district will be, the receiving district on their instructional end will be handling the rest of it. I think I got that right. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Mr. Garcia, but in the matching ESE student record, there needs to be one for each ESE transportation record, and obviously the school attendance records need to match with the ridership dates during the survey week. So again, these are best practices. I won't go through these in detail because they're in the best practices document, but these are some of the things that you just need to pay attention to during this process before you submit to DOE. So with that, I'm going to get directly, and this is part 2 of that slide, the various things that have to be included. Sheila pointed out, in emphasizing that some of this is best practice versus some of it being, kind of a base level requirement, that some of the information we've listed here, like the stop ID or the time at the stops, your stop records could be separate from all of this and within transportation only. But we put that on there because as a best practice, it certainly is helpful to have a reliable listing of which students get on and at which stops and when and all those things. Those are the kinds of things that transportation people, of course, know, you have, not per student perhaps, but that the routes and the stop times and all those things of course go into that big supplement that goes in the paper right before school starts. And I only see the one from Leon typically, but I can tell you Leon does a really, really good job with their public information and getting their information out prior to school starting. The parents pretty much know where their kids should be getting on the school bus stop, and I'm sure all of you do that. The final check by district IT, correcting any errors in the ridership file, and from there I'm going to let I'm going to let Candy Garcia talk about how we get into the rest of it. Candy, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. My name is Candy Garcia. I'm the new Educational Data Warehouse Metadata Administrator. For all of you, just to let you know, I'm the new Ruth Jones. What you see in front of you basically is the student transportation format that's required for transmission, surveys 1 through 4. As you see the layout in front of you, nothing really has changed. Later on, toward the end of this presentation, Charlie will touch bases in regards to the membership category, how things will slightly change for next school year. But everything that all the districts do in preparation leading up to the transmission, everything you do internally as far as getting that data into your primary student information system, doing your processing, doing the pre-editing to try to clean up all that information as best possible before that initial transmission. Once it is transmitted, very similar to your other formats during the survey period. It will be loaded, be processed accordingly, and you will receive additional edits. So if any other errors pop out, it will give you the opportunity to clean up that information. We can go to the next slide. And basically, what I've already stated is what you see in front of you. We receive that electronic file up here where every report is provided. You do get your validations, and that process is repeated during the survey window, and you will continue doing that until everything's pretty much fairly clean. But if any questions come up, then feel free to contact me. My name is on the website. If you got any questions with regard to the reporting of this transportation data.
Thank you, Candy. And I would add, we did talk about the what I call the quote unquote reconciliation process that we go through here at DOE. But many of you know that following the close of the survey processing period of the reporting processing period, we here at DOE look at various indicators of both the funding and the ridership, both base riders and the ESE weighted riders, and the number of buses in service. We look at those indicators and the funding that's generated by the latest calculation based on your survey data. And when there are variations in any of those things of more than 5% from the prior comparable survey, meaning survey 2 of last year versus survey 2 of this year, let's say, then we contact you and we say, hey, you may want to look at this and be sure you got it right. We want to be sure that we do as much sort of, I call it pre-auditing as we can, or reconciliation. And I think it's been helpful. I mean, we hate to bug you with that kind of thing, especially since we know it's a very compressed process and it's hard to get all this information right under the timelines that we've got. But districts generally do a good job of it. Fortunately, many of you have been very gracious and have said to us, those of you that have been subject to that kind of call or email from us, you've said, wow, I'm glad you pointed that out, because we did have something that went wrong and we need to fix it, and you've been able to fix it. So there is that reconciliation process, so don't be surprised if you get one of those emails or calls following the survey. As far as records and documentation, obviously student eligibility is one of the, what I call the these are the three biggies highlighted in blue. Student eligibility, do they meet the criteria for being claimed for funding? And we'll talk about the membership categories in a little bit. The student ridership and school attendance, and I emphasize and because it's not or, it's and so you need to make sure those match up, because the auditors will look at that. And an approved conveyance. Was the transportation in an approved mode or vehicle type? This doesn't come up very often, but we do sometimes have the occasional skirmish where we find out that some user was mistakenly using a non-school bus type bus vehicle, like an airport shuttle bus or something, and we say, hey, not only is that in violation of the safety regs and rules in 1006.22 and 1006.25, but by the way, it's not an approved conveyance for the purpose of funding. So, there's only a limited number of alternatives to a school bus, including public transit or what's called in the instruction general purpose transportation, passenger cars, privately owned passenger cars used to transport students with disabilities or who are isolated, that kind of thing. Or 99% of the kids, or whatever percentage, are in yellow school buses that meet all Florida specs. So that's an important piece of that. Audit documentation, obviously there's probably a lot more than we've listed here, but you need to have some contemporaneous documentation of that you maintain, that you archive, of the student's home address at the time of the survey, because that's critical for eligibility purposes. Prevent duplication of students. I think most of you probably have automation that does that, so that you don't accidentally double claim a particular student. Because, for instance, if you're claiming a kid center to center and they rode in the morning or the afternoon, they can't be claimed twice. Documenting the eligibility category, of course, that's one of the biggest issues that auditors tend to have in our experience when they have findings, is that not so much that the eligibility category was, was wrong, but they're still funding eligible, but that some kids were claimed as being funding eligible versus others who weren't. And, and obviously the categories define which groups of kids are funding eligible and which aren't. And here they are, the new membership categories. And this, unless something crazy happens that we're not expecting, this is still under review, as I understand it, Candy, by the MIS directors around the state. But we're not anticipating, this thing's been so completely vetted, to our knowledge, both within the department and through, through FAPT and others as the users, that we don't think we're going to have any big surprises here. So 99% chances are when you get the Student Transportation General Instructions for 2013-14, you'll see these changes. And what this essentially does, the easiest way to explain it is that we now have consolidated. We haven't changed any kid's eligibility in any way. What we've done with this is we've consolidated the membership categories such that you've got what I call five basic categories. And I'm not, if you can take your eyes away from the slide for a second and just kind of key on the words, the five categories are, we've retained the breakout in the new category, or in retained category F. We've retained the breakout F for teenage parents and infants, because we still need to capture who those students and babies and infants are. We've retained category G for hazardous walking, because that's a statutorily defined category that we still need to be able to break out. And those are the only two that are retained unchanged. The other three basic categories of the five are, they're either funding eligible at base level of funding, or number one, or number two, they're funding eligible at weighted funding, which of course includes only IDEA kids, pre-K through grade 12, or they're not eligible for funding at all. So essentially you've got teen parent, hazardous walking, base funding eligible, weighted funding eligible, and everybody else that's just not funding eligible. And these, categories you see here where we've listed the current 2012-13 and prior, don't get confused by those letters, because those letters will no longer exist. The new letter designations will be Category L, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, pre-K through grade 12, weighted. This is all the weighted kids that by definition have to be IDEA and have to meet one of the five specified criteria for receiving special service that are in the instructions. Category F, the same, hasn't changed, teen parents. Category G, hazardous walking, hasn't changed. New membership category M, and this is where the majority of your kids, the vast majority, are going to fall, including kids with disabilities who don't receive special weighted funding. This is all the current categories, B, E, H, J, and K, will be consolidated into this new category M, because essentially those kids all just generate base funding, and so from a funding perspective, there's no reason to separate them out anymore. And that's why the Auditor General hasn't heretofore gotten all that excited when you put a category kid, current category kid B, into current category H, because they're both unweighted and they both generate the same amount of money. So the discrete designations that we've had up till now and including now haven't been as big an issue as when you have put a kid in either in a weighted category where they didn't belong there, where they're generating more funding, or an ineligible kid in one of the categories that generates funding or something like that. So I know it's hard on a big webinar like this to be interactive and to answer all the questions relating to that, but if we have any, please let us know via the chat window, or raise your hand, or those kinds of things. But I just wanted to emphasize that, because that is new and different, and we haven't had much pushback from it. I think everybody recognizes that once they get over the programming changes or whatever are necessary to implement it, that administratively it's going to be a whole lot simpler. And that was one of the goals of the work group. So Greg or any of the other presenters on the call, do you want to add anything in that area or any other area so far?
No, I don't, Charlie.
All right.
No, sir.
Okay. Looks like we're running fairly well on schedule, Jamie. So we should actually have time for some questions here as we approach the end. But let me just go ahead and start. Oh, in category N. I'm sorry, I never did get to that slide. Those are the non-fundable. Basically, and this does, we used to think of this as just quote unquote the courtesy kids or the under 2 mile kids, and that may in fact be most of the ones that you report in this group. But we also have kids like children who are going to special programs in the summer under 21st Century Learning grants, where they're being funded under a grant by the feds and aren't eligible for state for state or local FEFP funding. So I think it's important to understand that this category try to think of this category as being a little broader than just under 2 mile kids. It's anybody who, for whatever reason, is not FEFP fundable. And while we're on the subject, I had one call in advance that I know is a common question this time of year about summer transportation, FEFP. We will be introducing some changes in that will become effective officially with the June of 2014 survey. So be prepared for the fact that that summer school transportation eligibility, which has not currently been really well defined in DOE's guidance, will be well defined. And if it's not, the bottom line is especially starting June 2014. But one could argue that it's true now. But we're really going to make it clear in the instructions so that if anybody does have any legacy things that they need to correct, they can do that. It will be clear that starting in June of 2014, if a summer school student is not exceptional student education extended school year qualified via their IEP, if they're not DJJ non-residential, which is a very narrow category, small category of students out there that receive FEFP, then if they're not FEFP funded in the classroom, then they won't be eligible for student transportation funding either. So that's going to be a critical distinction that's going to be phased in. Don't freak out about it. If you have any questions, let me know. But when you get the student transportation general instructions in June of this year for the next school year, you'll see those things, and then we'll obviously be available to answer questions at any point. But I did want to give you a heads up about that because some people had asked about that in advance of the webinar. Resources. This is how and where you can reach us all. This information will be on the FAPT website, and I'm going to flip there real quickly and bring that over. This is the FAPT website. If you go over here to this little link on the left side of the page that says Funding Working Group, you will see a number of the things we've talked about here. The best practices for student transportation ridership. The document that is guiding this webinar really is there. The consolidated membership, this is basically just a copy paste of, my slide was copy pasted from this, so you'll see that. You'll see a bunch of sample forms and procedures from districts once we get them put out there. They're not there yet. You'll see the Student Transportation General Instructions link, this is the link to the funding office website. And if you go down here to transportation, right here, you'll see the availability of all the student transportation general instructions, which the current 2012-13 version is right there. Trying to make this stuff as accessible as possible. And again, once we've got this webinar recorded and out there, you'll see the webinar link as well. So I encourage all of you to go there whenever you need anything as follow-up to this. Our office, DOE.org/transportation. There's our website. If you want to click down to the school district transportation profiles, you'll see that document. This is the latest available version. We're in the final stages of working on the school year 11-12 version. But this is the transportation profiles that we get a lot of requests for this from charter schools because they use it to determine how much you should be charging them theoretically. Understanding that this doesn't really fully explain that. And then we've already been through the funding and financial, and then the EIAS website where you'll find everything relating to their office, and you know, Candy may have to guide you through what's available on that website relative to transportation, but there it is. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's about it. Before we, Jamie, how are we doing on? Do we have any other comments, questions, additions, things we should have covered?
Well, we actually do. Miss Ethel Green has had her hand up since the beginning. So, Miss Green, if I can go ahead and unmute you, you can go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead.
Jamie, can you ask Kay to, I can hear her in the background.
Yeah. Okay, it's Terry, I'm sorry. Okay, she's wrapping up.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe you can mute in between talking.
Yeah, okay, I'll mute me.
So we had a question from Ethel Green. If you're still on the webinar, I think Jamie's in the process of unmuting you where you can talk.
She is unmuted. Ms. Green, do you have a question? Okay. Charlie, I do have a couple of questions that came in that I told him we would respond via email, maybe for Lee. Miss Free asked, when calculating the days and term for summer transportation reporting, would you count the total number of days the course met, or would you count the number of days from when the student enrolled in the course to the end of the course during that survey period?
You'd be surprised. Yesterday,
this is Lee. I think we could respond to that via email, but the way I believe it would work would be however long the transportation services are
and then they no longer shop on
for that summer program.
Okay. All right. I'll send
Jamie,
you the
can you?
somehow
Never mind.
I will email that question to you, Lee, and you can respond directly to Ms. Free. Charlie, I've answered all the other questions that basically came in.
All right.
That were simple. So if there's no final questions, or let me see, we have another raised hand here. Melanie Timgren, you're unmuted. Please ask your question. Melanie, are you there? Okay. I'm gonna. Let's try Ruth. Ruth Fulgham, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, what I'm wondering is, I have been asked several times when we go through an FEFP audit, is there a way to estimate the funding adjustment that will come out a year or two from our audit that we will know for budgeting purposes? Because the Auditor General's office doesn't give us an amount. We have to wait until it comes out, and we don't know how to estimate that. Is there someone that can help with that?
Ms. Fulgham, I would say probably the best way for you, this is Charlie Hood, I would say probably the best way for you to do that is, you say, an estimate. Maybe I should call it a guesstimate. But,
Right.
would be to go to our quality links document or to go to the latest transportation calculation and look at your school district's per student amount and use that as the basis. If that student is ruled ineligible, that's how much money you'll be adjusted downward at some point in the future. Now, keeping in mind that funding is always changing because we're dividing a limited pot of money amongst all the school districts. So if one school district's funding goes up, yours goes down in a future year and all those things.
Wow.
So it's a little bit of a moving target, but that would at least get you in the ballpark of, if you know your district is generating approximately, $350 a year from the FEFP, if you lose a kid, you're going to lose that much at some point.
Okay.
If they're ultimately found, after all the audit process and review and everything else, if they're ultimately adjusted, that's what it'll be. That's, in the ballpark.
Okay, that should help.
I just wanted to add to what Charlie was saying there, and what he said is correct. I think it is a moving target, but to stick to a ballpark, if you know your base funding per student amount and then your ESE funding per student amount, and apply those to the audit figures that are given. If you wanted to be real specific, you could go to the year of the audit and get those per student amounts. But either way, it's going to give you the ballpark number you're looking for.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, a question did just come in. Days in term for students who only ride a career bus to and from one school to another, but may not be all 5 days of the week during the normal school year. What is the days in term supposed to be?
Lee, do you want to answer that one?
I think we probably need to get that in an email, just because that's a little outside my expertise.
Okay.
Yeah. In general, I would say the days in term would be the days in term of the program itself to which schools are transported. So if that career ed program is only being offered 1 day a week, it would be 180 divided by 5, kind of thing. And if it's offered for both terms, of the school year. That make sense?
With that, yeah, I would agree with that.
With that, we have.
Okay.
I mean, that has been the general guidance or answer that we've provided, when asked that in the past.
Okay. Charlie, I don't have any. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I don't have anything else that's come in.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jamie. I want to close by thanking Greg Aiken and the rest of the committee members who represent all the different program areas from around the state. Especially Greg, because he and his assistant Linda Moore have done the heavy lifting with regard to keeping track of the committee's work and reviewing documents and keeping up with minutes and everything else. And any of you who've been involved in a process like this know that there's a lot of work that goes on in between the meetings. And Greg and Linda have done the heavy lifting with that. So thank you so much, Greg, for being a fair and balanced kind of a leader of this process. We very much appreciate the partnership that we've got with FAPT. I know all the program areas have that with their respective state associations, and we're very fortunate at DOE to have that sort of symbiotic relationship between our state association and our agency. So that's a great thing. Greg, or any of the others, do you want to add anything before we close? Because we're almost up on our prescribed time.
I just want to thank everybody for listening today, and thanks for your comments, Charlie.
Thank you all. We had about 100 people on the call today, and that's. I hope it's been valuable to you. Please let us know if there's any way we can help as follow-up. And with that, we'll sign off. So long, everybody.
Thank you.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.
With his bad self. I learned a whole bunch.
Were you on the receiving end?
I was.
How's it going?
That wasn't me talking.
That was Terry's phone call.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I understand. It's no problem, believe me.
And I was like,
You heard me blame me. Nobody blamed anybody. It just happened.
I was like,
it's
well,
just one of the dangers of working in a cubicle environment.
exactly.
Anyway, maybe next time we'll find you an office. Of course, I know you like to be in front of your computer.
I think they got some good information out of it. I mean, it was valuable.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a good thing.
kind of a quick.
Then you had all those people on there with you that answering, you know,